White Chicks, released in 2004, was built around the comic chemistry of Shawn Wayans and Marlon Wayans, two performers who were already closely associated with a distinctive family tradition of outrageous comedy. Directed by their older brother Keenen Ivory Wayans, the film gave Shawn and Marlon an opportunity to carry a major studio comedy while playing characters who spend most of the story pretending to be completely different people. Their performances required more than delivering jokes. They had to play FBI agents, the exaggerated personalities those agents created, and occasionally the nervous men underneath those disguises when their elaborate deception threatened to collapse. Shawn Wayans plays Kevin Copeland, one of the two FBI agents assigned to protect wealthy heiresses Brittany and Tiffany Wilson. Before White Chicks, Shawn had already established himself through television and film comedy. He appeared on the influential sketch series In Living Color, which helped introduce several members of the Wayans family to mainstream audiences. He later starred alongside Marlon in the sitcom The Wayans Brothers, where their natural chemistry became the center of the show. By the time White Chicks arrived, Shawn had also appeared in movies including Don't Be a Menace to South Central, While Drinking Your Juice in the Hood, and the first two Scary Movie films. That experience was important because Kevin is frequently positioned as the more controlled of the two brothers. Shawn provides a slightly more restrained comic presence, while Marlon often pushes scenes toward greater physical absurdity. Kevin is a character trying to keep their mission functioning even when everything around him becomes ridiculous. Shawn therefore becomes an important straight man within many sequences, although the movie still gives him plenty of opportunities for exaggerated reactions and physical comedy. Marlon Wayans plays Marcus Copeland, and his performance became one of the most recognizable elements of White Chicks. Like Shawn, Marlon had developed his career through the Wayans family's television and film projects. He appeared in The Wayans Brothers and Don't Be a Menace, but it also demonstrated that he could work outside broad comedy. His performance in Darren Aronofsky's Requiem for a Dream showed a dramatically different side of his abilities. That film presented Marlon in a serious and emotionally demanding role, proving that his career did not have to remain limited to comedy. White Chicks allowed him to return to extreme physical humor. Marcus becomes trapped in increasingly uncomfortable situations while pretending to be Tiffany Wilson, and Marlon uses facial expressions, body movement, vocal changes, and nervous reactions to communicate the absurdity of the disguise. His scenes with Terry Crews are especially important because Marcus must respond to the romantic attention of a man who believes Tiffany is real. Marlon frequently allows Marcus's panic to appear underneath the character he is pretending to be, creating several layers within the performance. Terry Crews plays professional basketball star Latrell Spencer, a supporting character who became one of the film's most memorable figures. Before White Chicks, Crews had already begun transitioning from professional football into acting. His early screen appearances included roles in Friday, After Next, and other television and film projects, but White Chicks gave him an unusually memorable showcase for his comedic abilities. Latrell could easily have been played simply as an intimidating athlete. Instead, Crews combines enormous physical presence with romantic enthusiasm, confidence, vulnerability, and complete sincerity. His performance works because Latrell rarely behaves as though he is participating in a joke. He genuinely believes he is pursuing Tiffany, and that seriousness makes the increasingly ridiculous encounters funnier. The restaurant sequence, the awkward date, and his enthusiastic musical moments became strongly associated with the film. White Chicks helped demonstrate that Crews could be much more than an imposing supporting actor. Comedy subsequently became a major part of his career, with later appearances in projects such as Everybody Hates Chris and Brooklyn Nine-Nine strengthening his reputation as a highly expressive comic performer. Jamie King plays Heather Vandergeld, one of the wealthy young women surrounding the Wilson sisters. King had entered entertainment through modeling before developing an acting career. Before White Chicks, she had appeared in films including Pearl Harbor and Bulletproof Monk. She later became particularly recognizable through Sin City. In White Chicks, Heather represents the privileged social world Kevin and Marcus must infiltrate. Her character helps establish the rivalries, insecurities, and status competition that dominate the group's relationships. Brittany Daniel plays Megan Vandergeld, Heather's sister. Daniel already had considerable television experience, particularly from Sweet Valley High, in which she appeared alongside her twin sister Cynthia Daniel. Her career also included roles in television and film before White Chicks. As Megan, she contributes to the exaggerated social hierarchy surrounding the central characters and participates in several of the confrontations between the women. Busy Phillips appears as Karen Googlestein, one of the Wilson sisters' friends. Before the film, Phillips had developed a strong television career through series including Freaks and Geeks and Dawson's Creek. When White Chicks arrived in 2004, few could have predicted how deeply the film would remain embedded in popular culture more than 2 decades later. Initially presented as an outrageous summer comedy built around disguises, mistaken identities, and exaggerated social stereotypes, the movie gradually developed a cultural life far beyond its original theatrical release. Critics were largely negative, but audiences continued watching it through television broadcasts, home video, streaming platforms, internet clips, and social media. Over time, individual scenes became memes. Quotes became part of everyday online language, and younger generations discovered the movie long after 2004. The cultural impact of White Chicks is closely connected to the period in which it was released. The early 2000s were dominated by celebrity culture, reality television, tabloid journalism, fashion magazines, wealthy socialites, and an increasing public fascination with the private lives of young celebrities. Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie became symbols of this environment, particularly through The Simple Life. Entertainment coverage constantly followed parties, relationships, fashion choices, scandals, and rivalries. White Chicks transformed that cultural atmosphere into comedy through the Wilson sisters and their wealthy social circle. Brittany and Tiffany Wilson represent exaggerated versions of the privileged celebrity heiress. Their obsession with appearance, social status, designer clothing, parties, and reputation immediately connected them to recognizable early 2000s stereotypes. Kevin and Marcus entering this environment while disguised as the sisters allows the film to mock the artificial behavior surrounding wealth and popularity. Much of the humor depends on the idea that social identity can become a performance. Characters carefully construct how other people see them, while Kevin and Marcus literally construct new identities through makeup, clothing, voices, and behavior. This makes identity one of the most culturally discussed aspects of White Chicks. The film uses race, gender, class, and physical appearance as sources of intentionally uncomfortable comedy. 2 black male FBI agents disguise themselves as wealthy white women, producing situations in which the characters move between very different social identities. The premise was deliberately provocative even in 2004, and discussions surrounding it have become more complicated as cultural attitudes toward race, gender representation, body image, and comedy have changed. Modern audiences sometimes debate whether a major studio would approve the same premise today. Some viewers argue that the film belongs to a period when mainstream comedies were more willing to use exaggerated stereotypes and potentially offensive material. Others argue that its central joke is more complicated than simply mocking women or racial identity, because the film repeatedly uses role reversal to expose stereotypes themselves. Kevin and Marcus experience a social environment governed by expectations concerning beauty, popularity, relationships, and status, while the people around them reveal their own prejudices and insecurities. The film's treatment of beauty standards has also remained relevant. White Chicks constantly exaggerates concerns about weight, clothing, facial appearance, attractiveness, and social approval. One famous sequence involves women discussing food and body size with an intensity that deliberately becomes absurd. The humor reflects the diet culture that was especially visible in celebrity magazines and entertainment media during the early 2000s. Female celebrities were regularly criticized for gaining or losing small amounts of weight, while unrealistic standards were presented as normal. Viewed years later, these scenes function as snapshots of the period. The movie exaggerates the language of body anxiety, but that exaggeration was based on recognizable cultural behavior. This allows modern audiences to laugh at the absurdity, while also recognizing how aggressively appearance was monitored within early 2000s popular culture. However, the most significant reason White Chicks has survived culturally is not academic discussion about identity or celebrity culture. It is simply extremely quotable. Many scenes were designed around strong punchlines, exaggerated reactions, and physical performances that could easily exist outside the complete narrative. That structure became unexpectedly perfect for the internet era. Lines and expressions in the film have repeatedly circulated through reaction images, short videos, GIFs, compilations, and memes. The confrontation involving the phrase, "You want to talk about mothers?" became one of the movie's most recognizable exchanges. The exaggerated argument works particularly well online because the facial expressions and escalating insults can be understood even without knowledge of the complete story. Another frequently remembered sequence involves the insult competition between the disguised Wilson sisters and the Vandergeld sisters. The scene demonstrates the movie's willingness to push jokes toward increasingly ridiculous extremes. Audiences have repeatedly shared fragments from this confrontation because each insult operates almost like an independent comedy sketch. Yet perhaps no element of White Chicks has achieved greater cultural longevity than its association with Vanessa Carlton's 1,000 Miles. The song had already been successful before the movie, but White Chicks created a new comedic association with it through Latrell Spencer. Terry Crews enthusiastically singing along became one of the defining images of the film. The contrast is central to the joke. Latrell is introduced as an enormous, confident professional athlete, yet he expresses complete emotional enthusiasm for a gentle piano-driven pop song. Instead of treating the song as something that contradicts his masculinity, Latrell embraces it without embarrassment. Terry Crews commits completely to the performance, and that sincerity makes the sequence memorable. Over the years, 1,000 Miles and White Chicks became culturally linked. People who discovered the song independently often encountered comments referencing Terry Crews or the movie. The production of White Chicks was almost as ambitious as its ridiculous premise. Released in 2004 and directed by Keenen Ivory Wayans, the film required the filmmakers to convince audiences that FBI agents Kevin and Marcus Copeland could enter the world of wealthy socialites while disguised as Brittany and Tiffany Wilson. Nobody was expected to believe the transformation was completely realistic. The challenge was different. The disguises needed to be convincing enough of fictional characters while remaining expressive enough for Shawn Wayans and Marlon Wayans to perform broad physical comedy underneath layers of makeup and prosthetics. The project developed as another major collaboration within the Wayans family. Keenen Ivory Wayans directed, while Shawn and Marlon Wayans starred and participated in developing the screenplay alongside other writers. This family connection was important because the three brothers had spent years developing a shared comedic language. Keenen had been one of the major creative forces behind In Living Color, and had already directed Shawn and Marlon in projects, including Scary Movie. Their familiarity allowed White Chicks to embrace an extreme premise, without constantly trying to make it realistic. The central concept demanded extensive makeup work. Shawn and Marlon could not simply wear wigs and dresses. Kevin and Marcus had to transform into two young white women whose appearances would remain consistent through close-ups, conversations, action scenes, dancing, and physical comedy. Prosthetic pieces were used to reshape visible facial features, while makeup changed skin appearance and wigs completed the transformations. False teeth, contact lenses, wardrobe choices, and body adjustments contributed to the overall illusion. This process meant that preparing Shawn and Marlon for filming could take several hours. Applying prosthetics is careful work because individual pieces must blend with the performer's natural face. Edges need to disappear beneath makeup. Skin tones must remain consistent under production lighting, and the materials have to survive movement for extended periods. Once everything was applied, the actors still needed enough facial mobility to communicate reactions clearly. That last requirement was particularly important for White Chicks because the movie depends heavily on expressions. Marcus frequently reacts with panic when Latrell Spencer becomes romantically interested in his disguised identity. Kevin must smile through uncomfortable conversations while simultaneously attempting to control the investigation. If the prosthetics had prevented the actors from expressing themselves, much of the comedy would have disappeared. The makeup also created practical challenges. Prosthetics can become uncomfortable under hot lights and during long shooting days. The performers had to spend significant periods wearing heavy transformations while still delivering energetic performances. Removing everything at the end of the day was another process rather than something that could be completed instantly. The transformation therefore affected the production schedule before and after the cameras were actually rolling. The filmmakers were also dealing with an unusual visual balance. If the disguises looked too realistic, some of the absurdity could disappear. If they look completely impossible, audiences might become distracted by the fact that every character accepts them. White Chicks ultimately embraces the artificial quality. The slightly exaggerated faces become part of the movie's visual identity, rather than hiding the absurdity. The production turns it into part of the joke. Costume design was equally important. Kevin and Marcus are not merely pretending to be women. They are pretending to be extremely wealthy young women obsessed with fashion and social status. Their clothing, therefore, had to communicate the exaggerated luxury culture being parroted. Handbags, jewelry, coordinated outfits, shoes, hairstyles, and accessories help establish the social environment immediately. The performers also had to adjust their physical behavior. Walking in unfamiliar shoes, managing fitted clothing, controlling gestures, changing vocal patterns, and maintaining their fictional personalities all became part of performances. Much of the comedy comes from watching Kevin and Marcus struggle to maintain these details, while unexpected situations push them toward their normal behavior. White Chicks is strongly associated with the Hamptons, but much of the production was actually filmed in British Columbia, Canada. Vancouver and surrounding locations provided many of the environments used to create the wealthy East Coast atmosphere required by the story. This is a common filmmaking technique, because one region can double for another when architecture, landscapes, production design, and carefully selected camera angles are combined effectively. The production needed luxurious hotels, elegant homes, fashionable shopping areas, restaurants, roads, and spaces suitable for large social events. These environments established the contrast between the FBI agents' normal lives and the privileged world they suddenly have to navigate. Once Kevin and Marcus arrive among the wealthy socialites, the movie becomes brighter, more fashionable, and deliberately excessive. One of the production's most memorable elements involved Terry Crews as Latrell Spencer. Crews was still developing his screen career when he joined White Chicks, and the role became an important demonstration of his comedic potential. His enormous physical presence initially suggests that Latrell will be an intimidating character, but Keenan Ivory Wayans and the performers turned that expectation into comedy by making him unexpectedly romantic, enthusiastic, and emotionally expressive. The date between Latrell and Marcus became one of the film's standout sequences. White Chicks builds a story around a familiar undercover comedy structure and then deliberately complicates it through mistaken identity, social rivalry, romance, crime, and escalating deception. At the center are FBI agents Kevin and Marcus Copeland, brothers whose careers are threatened after an operation goes badly. Their professional failure establishes the central motivation immediately. They need a successful assignment to restore their reputation, but instead of receiving a glamorous mission, they are ordered to protect wealthy heiresses Brittany and Tiffany Wilson from a possible kidnapping. The opening operation introduces Kevin and Marcus as energetic but reckless agents. They disguise themselves while attempting to capture criminals involved in a drug investigation, but the operation collapses through misunderstandings and poor judgment. Narratively, this sequence establishes the film's formula before the main story begins. The brothers are willing to use disguises. They frequently improvise instead of following procedure, and their plans have a tendency to create larger problems than the ones they were designed to solve. After being reprimanded, Kevin and Marcus are given responsibility for transporting the Wilson sisters to the Hamptons. Brittany and Tiffany belong to an extremely wealthy social world dominated by fashion, parties, reputation, and competition. The assignment initially appears simple. The agents only need to deliver them safely, while the FBI watches for potential kidnappers. The narrative changes direction when a minor accident causes the sisters to suffer facial injuries. For Brittany and Tiffany, appearing publicly with even small imperfections is unacceptable. They refuse to continue with the planned social weekend. This creates the film's major first turning point. Kevin realizes that returning without the sisters could destroy his career, so he proposes an outrageous solution. He and Marcus will impersonate Brittany and Tiffany themselves. This decision transforms the movie from an FBI comedy into an identity farce. The brothers undergo extensive makeovers and emerge as exaggerated versions of the Wilson sisters. From this moment forward, the story operates on two levels. Kevin and Marcus must continue investigating the kidnapping threat, while simultaneously convincing everyone around them that they are two wealthy white women. The middle portion of White Chicks uses this deception as an engine for episodic comedy. instead of advancing directly toward the criminals. The screenplay repeatedly introduces social situations that threaten the disguise. Each new encounter creates a miniature conflict. The brothers must survive conversations with the Wilson sisters' friends, arguments with their rivals, romantic attention, shopping trips, parties, and situations where their knowledge of the real women's lives is incomplete. Their friendship with Karen, Lisa, and Tori becomes important because it draws Kevin and Marcus deeper into the social world they initially view as ridiculous. At first, the women seem like exaggerated stereotypes of privileged young socialites. As the story develops, however, the brothers discover insecurities and relationship problems beneath their superficial behavior. These interactions provide pauses between the larger comic set pieces and create an emotional connection between the undercover agents and the people they are deceiving. The Vandergeld sisters, Heather and Megan, provide a different type of conflict. They are social rivals who constantly challenge and insult the supposed Wilson sisters. These confrontations allow the film to build comedy without relying on the kidnapping plot. The famous insult exchange is structured almost like a verbal battle, with each side escalating until the confrontation becomes deliberately absurd. The dance competition performs a similar narrative function through physical comedy. What begins as rivalry becomes an opportunity for Kevin and Marcus to reveal abilities that Brittany and Tiffany would not normally possess. Every time the brothers behave too naturally, they risk exposing themselves. The movie repeatedly creates tension from this contradiction. They must succeed socially without succeeding so dramatically that people begin wondering why the Wilson sisters have suddenly changed. Marcus faces the most dangerous romantic complication through Latrell Spencer. Latrell becomes immediately attracted to the disguised Marcus, believing him to be Tiffany. This creates one of the film's central running jokes. Marcus wants to discourage him but cannot simply reveal the truth. Every attempt to become undesirable somehow increases Latrell's attraction. Their restaurant date demonstrates the movie's escalation-based structure particularly well. Marcus deliberately behaves in ways he believes will disgust Latrell. Instead of rejecting him, Latrell becomes increasingly impressed. The sequence does little to advance the criminal investigation, but increases the danger surrounding Marcus's false identity while developing Latrell into a memorable supporting character. Kevin experiences his own romantic storyline with Denise Porter, a journalist investigating Warren Vandergeld. Unlike Marcus, Kevin uses his disguise partly as a way of getting closer to someone he genuinely likes. He eventually creates another false identity, presenting himself as a wealthy and sophisticated man in order to impress Denise. The result is a deception inside the larger deception. Kevin is an FBI agent pretending to be Brittany, while also pretending to be another man. This layering is fundamental to the narrative. White Chicks constantly adds complications rather than resolving existing ones. The brothers begin with one lie, then require additional lies to protect it. Every successful improvisation makes their situation temporarily easier, while creating another possibility of exposure later. Meanwhile, the screenplay continues returning to the kidnapping investigation. The FBI suspects that the Wilson sisters are potential targets, and the agents remain responsible for identifying the people behind the threat. The mystery operates largely in the background during the middle of the film, because the comedy receives greater attention. This produces an intentionally uneven narrative rhythm. Long sections function almost as independent sketches before the crime storyline returns to pull everything toward the climax. Beneath the exaggerated disguises and outrageous comedy of White Chicks lies a story built around identity, appearance, social expectations, friendship, masculinity, beauty, and the difference between public image and private reality. The film rarely presents these ideas seriously for long, but they appear throughout the narrative. Almost every major character is concerned with how other people perceive them, making appearance much more than a visual joke. It becomes one of the central forces controlling the story. The most obvious theme is identity. Kevin and Marcus Copeland spend most of the film pretending to be people who are completely different from themselves. They change their skin color, clothing, hairstyles, voices, mannerisms, and social behavior to become Brittany and Tiffany Wilson. The transformation creates the movie's central comedy, but also establishes a world where identity is presented as something that can be constructed and performed. Kevin and Marcus quickly discover that looking like the Wilson sisters is not enough. They must understand how the sisters speak, who their friends are, which people they dislike, and how wealthy young socialites are expected to behave. Identity therefore becomes a collection of social signals. Clothes, language, body movement, relationships, and reputation all contribute to whether other people accept the disguise. This idea extends beyond the brothers. The wealthy characters constantly perform versions of themselves. Brittany and Tiffany are obsessed with maintaining their image because social status depends on appearance. Heather and Megan Vandergeld use confidence and cruelty to protect their position. Latrell Spencer presents himself as powerful and desirable while revealing unexpectedly sentimental interests. Warren Vandergeld maintains the appearance of wealth and respectability while hiding serious financial and criminal problems. The contrast between appearance and reality becomes one of the movie's strongest recurring themes. Nearly everyone is hiding something. Kevin and Marcus hide their identities. Kevin hides his real circumstances while pursuing Denise. Warren hides his desperation. The socialites hide insecurity behind expensive clothes and aggressive confidence. Even relationships that appear glamorous frequently contain jealousy, dishonesty, or emotional dissatisfaction. The physical disguises symbolize this larger pattern. The artificial faces worn by Kevin and Marcus are intentionally noticeable to the audience. We are always aware that there are different people underneath. The characters inside the film cannot see through the disguise, creating a comic reminder that people often accept appearances without questioning what exists beneath them. Beauty standards form another important theme. White Chicks takes place within a social environment where physical appearance carries enormous value. Small imperfections are treated as disasters. Clothing choices can determine status. Weight becomes a constant source of anxiety, and women compare themselves with one another through highly exaggerated standards. The real Wilson sisters refusing to appear publicly after suffering minor facial injuries establishes this theme early. Their reaction is deliberately excessive, but it demonstrates how completely appearance controls their behavior. For them, being seen while looking imperfect is worse than missing an important social event. Food becomes a recurring symbol within this discussion. Several scenes connect eating with body image and social pressure. Characters worry about calories while simultaneously craving food. The comedy exaggerates the contradictions of diet culture, particularly the early 2000s obsession with extremely thin celebrity bodies. Eating becomes something characters desire, but also feel expected to control. Marcus disrupts these expectations during his date with Latrell. He deliberately eats in an exaggerated and supposedly unattractive manner because he wants Latrell to lose interest. Instead, Latrell remains fascinated. The sequence reverses the social rules established elsewhere in the movie. Behavior Marcus assumes will make him undesirable actually makes Latrell more attracted to him. Masculinity is similarly treated as something performative. Kevin and Marcus begin the movie as confident male FBI agents who associate competence with physical action and professional success. Their assignment forces them into situations where those instincts cannot always be expressed openly. They must change how they walk, speak, react, and interact while maintaining their cover. The film uses this contrast for broad humor, but also repeatedly challenges rigid expectations of masculine behavior. Latrell is perhaps the clearest example. Physically, he represents an exaggerated image of masculine strength. He is enormous, athletic, wealthy, confident, and sexually assertive. Yet, one of his defining moments is his emotional enthusiasm for 1,000 miles. The joke initially depends on a contrast between his appearance and the song, but Latrell never appears embarrassed. He enjoys what he enjoys. In that sense, the character accidentally becomes one of the film's most comfortable expressions of identity. Other characters constantly worry about how they are perceived, while Latrell frequently behaves with complete confidence. Friendship becomes increasingly important as Kevin and Marcus spend time with Karen, Lisa, and Tori. Initially, the brothers approach these women as part of their assignment. Their conversations are performances designed to protect the disguise. Gradually, however, genuine emotional connections develop. The women reveal insecurities involving relationships, attractiveness, and social acceptance. Kevin and Marcus begin offering advice that comes from their own perspectives rather than from anything Brittany or Tiffany would necessarily say. Ironically, the friendships become more authentic precisely because the identities behind them are false. This creates one of the film's central contradictions. The brothers are lying about who they are, but some of the emotional support they provide is sincere. The disguises therefore become barriers and opportunities simultaneously. They prevent honest relationships while allowing Kevin and Marcus to enter conversations they would never otherwise experience. Class is another theme running throughout the film. The Hamptons environment represents extreme privilege. The visual style of White Chicks is designed to support its exaggerated comedy rather than draw attention to cinematography for its own sake. Director Keenan Ivory Wayans and cinematographer Steven Bernstein create a bright, polished world that contrasts the ordinary working lives of Kevin and Marcus Copeland with the luxurious social environment they enter as Brittany and Tiffany Wilson. The camera usually remains clear and accessible, allowing performances, disguises, physical reactions, costumes, and comic timing to dominate the frame. This straightforward approach is essential because the movie's humor frequently depends on audiences seeing exactly how characters react to increasingly absurd situations. The opening FBI material establishes a more functional visual environment. Kevin and Marcus are introduced as agents attempting an undercover operation, and the imagery emphasizes movement, confusion, and physical comedy. The locations feel practical and relatively grounded compared with what follows. Once the story shifts toward the Wilson sisters and their wealthy lifestyle, the movie becomes noticeably more glamorous. Hotels, expensive vehicles, fashionable interiors, shopping areas, parties, and elegant homes create a world where appearance is constantly being evaluated. This visual contrast supports the central transformation. Kevin and Marcus begin as FBI agents dressed for work, but after becoming Brittany and Tiffany, they are surrounded by bright clothing, carefully styled hair, makeup, accessories, and luxury. Their environment seems to transform with them. The film uses this transition to signal that they have entered a different social universe with its own visual rules. The color palette reflects the early 2000s comedy aesthetic. Bright whites, soft pastels, pinks, fashionable neutrals, and saturated party colors appear throughout the social sequences. These choices complement the Wilson sisters' image and reinforce the movie's parody of wealthy young celebrity culture. The visual world is intentionally clean and attractive because Kevin and Marcus are infiltrating a community obsessed with presentation. Lighting is generally bright and flattering. White Chicks is not interested in dramatic shadows or naturalistic darkness during most of its running time. Faces need to remain clearly visible because facial expressions are among the movie's most important comedic tools. Shawn Wayans and Marlon Wayans frequently communicate jokes through sudden looks of panic, disgust, confusion, or forced enthusiasm. Terry Crews similarly relies on extremely expressive reactions as Latrell Spencer. This lighting strategy also creates a technical challenge because the prosthetic transformations must survive close inspection. The disguises cannot constantly be hidden by darkness. Kevin and Marcus interact with other characters in daylight, hotel rooms, stores, restaurants, and brightly illuminated social spaces. The makeup therefore becomes a major component of the film's visual effects, even though it is primarily practical rather than digital. The facial transformations are intentionally exaggerated. The filmmakers are not attempting to convince the audience that Shawn and Marlon have literally become two completely natural-looking women. The audience understands the artificiality immediately. The important requirement is that characters inside the story accept the disguise. This creates an unusual visual contract between the film and the viewer. We recognize how ridiculous the transformation appears, but we agree to accept that it works within the movie's reality. Close-ups are particularly important because the prosthetics must allow the actors' performances to remain readable. When Marcus realizes Latrell is attracted to him, the humor often comes from watching Marlon's expression change beneath the Tiffany disguise. His eyes may communicate panic, while his mouth maintains a polite smile. The camera gives these contradictory expressions enough space to register. Reaction shots are one of the most important techniques in the film. Many jokes follow a simple visual rhythm. A character says or does something outrageous. The camera cuts to Kevin or Marcus processing what just happened, and then the scene escalates. These reactions provide punctuation. Without them, the dialogue would move too quickly, and audiences would lose part of the joke. The camera is especially effective when several characters occupy the same scene. Group conversations among Karen, Lisa, Tori, the Vandergeld sisters, and the disguised agents frequently use medium shots and shot-reverse shot editing. This allows viewers to understand the social geography of the conversation. We know who is attacking whom, who feels embarrassed, and who is waiting to respond. The famous insult confrontation demonstrates this approach. The scene is visually uncomplicated, but the editing becomes part of the comedy. Each insult receives a reaction, followed by another response and another reaction. The sequence gains energy because the camera treats the exchange almost like a competitive sporting event. Facial expressions become as important as the insults themselves. Physical comedy requires a different approach. Wider framing is used when the audience needs to understand body movement, particularly during dancing, fights, falls, and exaggerated gestures. The dance battle is the clearest example. Constant close-ups would make the choreography difficult to appreciate, so the camera frequently pulls back to show complete movements and the relationship between competing groups. Editing then adds momentum by alternating wider choreography with closer reaction shots. The spectators become part of the sequence because their excitement tells the audience how the competition is developing. This is a traditional comedy technique. The performers execute the action while the surrounding characters amplify its importance through exaggerated reactions. The Luttrell sequences use visual contrast especially effectively. Terry Crews physically dominates many frames because of his muscular build and height. When he appears beside the disguised Marcus, the difference becomes immediately comic. The filmmakers do not need dialogue to explain why Marcus feels intimidated. Simply placing the characters together communicates the imbalance. Music plays an unusually important role in White Chicks because the soundtrack does more than provide background energy. Songs help define the early 2000s setting, establish the wealthy party environment, support physical comedy, and in several cases become essential parts of the jokes themselves. The movie combines popular music with a traditional comedy score and carefully timed sound effects, creating an audio identity that remains strongly connected to the film decades after its release. Most importantly, White Chicks demonstrates how a familiar song can be transformed by context, with Vanessa Carlton's 1,000 Miles becoming almost inseparable from Terry Crews and his performance as Luttrell Spencer. The film arrived during a period when mainstream Hollywood comedies frequently use recognizable popular songs to establish youth culture. White Chicks takes place among wealthy young socialites whose lives revolve around parties, fashion, shopping, relationships, and status. The soundtrack therefore needs to make that world feel contemporary to 2004. Pop, hip-hop, R&B, and dance-oriented music help create the impression that Kevin and Marcus have entered a fashionable environment with its own cultural language. This music also separates the FBI's storyline from the Hamptons' material. The law enforcement scenes are more functional and plot-driven, while the social sequences become increasingly energetic and music-heavy. Once the brothers transform themselves into Brittany and Tiffany Wilson, songs help communicate the new world they must navigate. Music becomes part of the disguise because Kevin and Marcus need to understand not only how the sisters look and speak, but also how they participate in the social culture surrounding them. The most important musical moment belongs to 1,000 Miles. Vanessa Carlton released a song before White Chicks, and it was already widely recognizable. The movie, however, gave it an entirely new comedic identity. Luttrell Spencer's enthusiastic response to the song works because it contradicts the assumptions audiences might initially make about him. Luttrell is introduced as an enormous professional athlete with extreme confidence and an intimidating physical presence. A predictable soundtrack might have accompanied him with aggressive hip-hop or music designed to emphasize power. Instead, his passionate enjoyment of a gentle piano-driven pop song reveals an unexpected side of his personality. The contrast creates immediate comedy. Terry Crews' performance makes the scene work. Luttrell does not listen to the song ironically. He loves it. His facial expressions and physical enthusiasm suggest complete emotional commitment, and the film allows that enthusiasm to continue rather than cutting away after a brief joke. Because Crews plays the moment sincerely, the song becomes part of Luttrell's characterization rather than simply a musical punchline. The sequence also demonstrates an important principle of comedy sound design. Contrast can be funnier than exaggeration. The filmmakers do not need an absurd sound effect to tell viewers that the situation is funny. The existing cultural associations of the song collide with Luttrell's imposing appearance. The audience recognizes the contrast immediately. Over time, this association became one of White Chicks' greatest contributions to popular music culture. For many viewers, hearing the opening piano of A Thousand Miles immediately recalls Terry Crews. The movie effectively gave the song a second identity. This is especially remarkable because the song was not written for the film and had already established its own success. The dance battle uses music differently. Here, rhythm becomes a foundation of physical competition. The scene is structured around movement, confidence, and escalation, so the soundtrack must provide enough energy for the choreography to feel increasingly intense. The characters are not simply dancing at a party. The sequence turns dancing into a confrontation where social status is temporarily determined through performance. Music controls the pacing. Beats provide natural points for cuts, reactions, movements, and reveals. Wider shots allow viewers to appreciate the choreography, while closer shots capture the reactions of spectators. The soundtrack connects these images into a continuous rhythm. Without the music, much of the sequence would lose its momentum. This relationship between editing and audio appears throughout the film. White Chicks often allows music to carry transitions between locations or establish the mood of a new social environment before dialogue begins. A recognizable song can immediately communicate whether a scene is supposed to feel glamorous, romantic, energetic, or ridiculous. The soundtrack also reflects the film's mixture of cultural worlds. Kevin and Marcus come from a different background than the privileged socialites they impersonate, and the comedy frequently depends on the brothers bringing their own instincts into situations governed by unfamiliar expectations. Music becomes another area where those worlds overlap. The original score was composed by Teddy Costalucci, whose work supports the film without attempting to overpower its popular soundtrack. Comedy scoring often requires restraint. If music announces every joke too aggressively, scenes can feel forced. The score therefore helps establish movement, suspense, awkwardness, and transitions while leaving the largest comedic moments to the actors. The FBI material particularly benefits from this approach. Because the plot involves surveillance, undercover operations, kidnapping threats, and criminal investigation, the music occasionally needs to suggest genuine urgency. However, White Chicks never wants viewers to forget that they are watching a comedy. The score therefore balances elements of action and suspense with a lighter tone. This becomes increasingly important as the film approaches its climax. The kidnapping storyline must temporarily feel dangerous enough to justify Kevin and Marcus acting as FBI agents rather than simply continuing their social impersonation. Music helps shift the tone toward action while maintaining continuity with comedy that came before it. Sound effects are equally important to the physical humor. White Chicks was released in 2004 and quickly became an unusual example of a movie whose relationship with critics was dramatically different from its relationship with audiences. Professional reviews were overwhelmingly negative, with many critics attacking the film's premise, humor, makeup effects, stereotypes, and reliance on crude comedy. Yet those reviews did little to prevent the movie from developing an enormous following. Over the following years, White Chicks became a frequently watched comedy, a television favorite, a source of internet memes, and eventually a nostalgic classic for many viewers who grew up during the 2000s. The theatrical response immediately demonstrated this divide. White Chicks was not treated by critics as a sophisticated comedy or an important artistic achievement. Reviews frequently described the premise as ridiculous and questioned whether the central disguises were convincing enough to support an entire movie. The sight of Shawn Wayans and Marlon Wayans transformed into Brittany and Tiffany Wilson became one of the most criticized visual elements. Some reviewers found the prosthetic faces distracting or even unsettling rather than convincing. However, realism was never particularly important to the movie's comedy. Audiences understood that Kevin and Marcus did not genuinely resemble ordinary young women. The joke depended partly on everyone inside the movie accepting something that viewers could clearly recognize as absurd. For fans, the artificial appearance of disguises eventually became part of the film's identity rather than a weakness. Critics were also divided from audiences over the style of humor. White Chicks uses racial stereotypes, gender stereotypes, sexual jokes, body humor, insults, physical comedy, and exaggerated social caricatures. The screenplay rarely approaches these subjects subtly. Instead, it pushes situations until they become increasingly ridiculous. For reviewers who disliked this style, the movie seemed repetitive and excessive. Several sequences extend a single joke far beyond its initial setup. The restaurant date between Marcus and Latrell is a good example. Marcus attempts repeatedly to make himself undesirable, only for Latrell to become more interested. The sequence continues escalating rather than quickly moving to another joke. Fans often responded to exactly this quality differently. The willingness to continue escalating situations became one of the reasons individual scenes were remembered. Instead of producing dozens of small jokes that disappeared after the first viewing, White Chicks created extended comic sequences with recognizable beginnings, developments, and payoffs. The performances received similarly mixed reactions. Shawn and Marlon Wayans were criticized by some reviewers for relying too heavily on exaggerated voices, expressions, and physical humor. Yet their commitment to the disguises became essential to the movie's long-term popularity. Marlon in particular creates humor by allowing Marcus's personality to emerge unexpectedly through Tiffany. A facial expression or sudden change in voice can reveal the frustrated FBI agent underneath the carefully constructed disguise. Terry Crews became one of the clearest examples of performance that audiences embraced. His portrayal of Latrell Spencer could easily have remained a relatively small supporting role, but Crews transformed the character into one of the movie's most recognizable figures. His physical presence, complete confidence, romantic pursuit of Tiffany, and enthusiastic musical personality gave the film some of its strongest comic contrasts. The response to Latrell illustrates why White Chicks survived beyond its initial reviews. Audiences frequently remember individual experiences more strongly than overall critical judgments. Someone may not remember every detail of the kidnapping plot, but they remember Latrell singing 1,000 Miles. They remember the restaurant date. They remember the dance battle and the insult competition. These moments develop lives outside the complete movie. Commercially, White Chicks performed far better than its critical reputation might suggest. Produced on a substantial comedy budget, it earned more than $100 million worldwide. It was not one of the largest blockbusters of 2004, but it demonstrated that the Wayans brand remained commercially powerful. Audiences were willing to buy tickets for an outrageous concept, even when reviewers were warning them away. White Chicks has developed a legacy that few people could have predicted when it was released in 2004. Originally received as a broad studio comedy with a deliberately outrageous premise, the film survived far beyond its initial theatrical run and became one of the most recognizable comedies associated with the Wayans family. Its influence cannot be measured through major awards or a wave of direct imitations. Instead, its importance comes from audience loyalty, internet culture, memorable performances, repeated television exposure, streaming rediscovery, and continuing demand for a sequel more than 2 decades after the original film appeared. The most obvious part of its legacy is its transformation into a cult favorite. White Chicks was not initially welcomed by critics, yet negative reviews failed to determine how audiences would remember it. Over time, viewers repeatedly returned to the film, particularly through home video and television. Certain sequences became familiar enough that audiences could quote them before they happened. This repeatability became one of the strongest foundations of its long-term reputation. The film benefited from being constructed around large individual comedy sequences. The kidnapping investigation provides a narrative framework, but the scenes most audiences remember can almost function independently. The insult battle, the dance competition, Marcus and Latrell's date, the changing room humor, the friendship conversations, and the musical sequences all contain their own setups and payoffs. That structure became particularly valuable during the rise of online video. Short sections of White Chicks could be separated from the complete film without losing their comic meaning. A viewer encountering Terry Crews singing in a car does not need detailed knowledge of the kidnapping storyline to understand why a performance is funny. The same is true of many reaction shots and verbal confrontations. As internet culture expanded, the movie found a second life through GIFs, memes, reaction images, short clips, and quotations. Expressions from Shawn and Marlon Wayans became useful as visual responses to everyday situations online. Scenes originally written for a 2004 theatrical comedy were transformed into pieces of digital language. This helped White Chicks reach audiences who were too young to remember its theatrical release. Some viewers first encountered the movie through a meme or short clip before watching complete film. Instead of becoming trapped within its original generation, White Chicks moved between generations through digital circulation. The connection between the movie and 8,000 Miles remains perhaps the strongest example of its cultural influence. Vanessa Carlton's song was already successful independently, but White Chicks gave it an additional identity through Latrell Spencer. Terry Crews' enthusiastic performance became so memorable that the opening piano melody could trigger recognition of the film years later. This association demonstrates the ability of cinema to redefine existing music. White Chicks did not introduce the world to 8,000 Miles, but it changed the cultural context in which many people heard it. The song could now function simultaneously as sincere pop music and as a reference to one of the film's most famous jokes. Terry Crews himself received an important career benefit from the movie. White Chicks revealed how effectively his intimidating physical appearance could be contrasted with emotional openness and comic enthusiasm. Later projects would repeatedly make use of his ability to combine enormous physical presence with vulnerability and humor. His later television success made the White Chicks performance even more recognizable in retrospect. For audiences familiar with his subsequent comedy work, Latrell appears like an early demonstration of the qualities that would eventually become central to his screen persona. His willingness to commit completely to ridiculous material without acting embarrassed became one of his greatest comedic strengths. For Shawn and Marlon Wayans, the movie became one of the defining projects of their careers. They had already achieved major recognition through television and films such as Scary Movie, but the visual concept of White Chicks was so distinctive that Kevin and Marcus remained permanently associated with them. Images of the brothers in their Brittany and Tiffany disguises became instantly recognizable. Even people unable to remember the complete plot often recognized the blonde wigs, prosthetic faces, and exaggerated fashion. This visual identity gave the film an advantage many comedies lack. A single photograph can immediately identify it. White Chicks also occupies an important position within the larger Wayans comedy tradition. The family had already established a reputation for parody, physical comedy, social satire, and humor willing to cross boundaries. In Living Color had influenced sketch television, while Scary Movie helped launch a major period of theatrical parody films. White Chicks took that willingness to exaggerate social identity and built an entire narrative around it. The film's influence on comedy is therefore more stylistic than directly imitative. It reinforced the value of total commitment to an absurd premise. The story never apologizes for how ridiculous the disguises are. Instead, it builds increasingly elaborate situations around them. Modern discussions of theatrical comedy frequently use films from the 1990s and 2000s as examples of the period when studios released more broad, star-driven comedies into cinemas. White Chicks has become part of that nostalgia conversation. Fans compare it with movies that were designed primarily to make large audiences laugh rather than connect to franchises or cinematic universes. Its legacy is also tied to debates over changing boundaries in comedy. People frequently ask whether a movie with the same premise will receive a major theatrical release today. The question has no simple answer, but its persistence demonstrates how White Chicks has become a reference point in conversations about race, gender, stereotypes, and offensive humor. Some viewers interpret the movie as a product of a more permissive comedic period. Others emphasize that it received significant criticism even when released. The controversy is therefore part of the legacy rather than something created entirely by modern audiences. White Chicks has developed an unusual relationship with its audience because the way people feel about the movie today is often very different from the way it was discussed when it first appeared in 2004. For many viewers, it is no longer simply a comedy about two FBI agents wearing elaborate disguises. It has become a comfort movie, a source of nostalgia, a collection of endlessly repeated jokes, and a reminder of a particular period in popular culture. Different generations have discovered the film under different circumstances, but a shared response has helped White Chicks survive far beyond its original theatrical life. Audiences who watched White Chicks when it was first released encountered it during a very specific cultural moment. Celebrity magazines, reality television, wealthy socialites, designer fashion, and tabloid scandals were major parts of entertainment culture. The fictional Wilson sisters immediately resembled the type of young heiress who could dominate celebrity news without needing to be a traditional actress or musician. For viewers living through that period, the parody was immediately recognizable. The obsession with appearance, exclusive parties, Designer clothing, popularity, dieting, and romantic status reflected attitudes that were constantly visible in entertainment media. White chicks exaggerated these qualities, but audiences understood what was being exaggerated. This connection changed as the movie aged. Younger viewers discovering White Chicks years later may not have personal memories of the celebrity culture it originally mocked. Instead, the movie itself can become an introduction to the exaggerated aesthetics of the early 2000s. Flip phones, fashion choices, hairstyles, music, cars, and social behavior now contribute to the film's nostalgic appeal. For the generation that grew up with the movie, this transformation is particularly powerful. Watching White Chicks today can produce memories unrelated to the actual narrative. Viewers may remember watching the DVD with friends, discovering the film on television, repeating lines at school, or imitating Terry Crews singing 1,000 Miles. The movie becomes connected to personal history. This helps explain why audience affection can remain strong even when viewers recognize obvious flaws. Fans do not necessarily believe that White Chicks has a perfectly constructed screenplay or realistic premise. They enjoy it because the movie provides familiar comic experiences. Knowing exactly what is about to happen can actually increase the enjoyment. The Latrell Spencer scenes are a perfect example. Most returning viewers already know how Marcus's disastrous date will unfold. They know that Marcus is attempting to discuss Latrell, and that each attempt will somehow make Latrell more interested. The absence of surprise does not destroy the comedy, because anticipation becomes part of the experience. Terry Crews' performance has become especially important to audience reflection. Latrell initially appears to be an exaggerated image of physical masculinity. He is enormous, confident, wealthy, and direct about his attraction. Yet the film repeatedly gives him characteristics that contradict the audience's first assumptions. His love for 1,000 Miles is the most famous example. Audiences often respond warmly to the moment because Latrell is completely unashamed. He does not treat his musical taste as a secret. His confidence allows him to enjoy something that the audience might initially consider unexpected for a character with his appearance. This gives the joke a surprisingly positive quality. The audience laughs at the contrast, but Latrell himself does not need to change. In later years, some viewers have interpreted the moment as an unexpectedly effective rejection of narrow masculine stereotypes. A physically powerful man can enthusiastically enjoy sentimental pop music without becoming less confident. Kevin and Marcus produce more complicated interpretations. Their transformation into Brittany and Tiffany places race and gender at the center of the comedy. Some viewers simply accept the disguise as an absurd fictional device. Others examine what the premise suggests about racial identity, femininity, masculinity, and social expectations. Modern audiences are often more conscious of these questions than viewers were encouraged to be by mainstream entertainment in 2004. As a result, White Chicks can produce contradictory reactions. A person may find a movie extremely funny, while simultaneously recognizing that certain jokes depend on stereotypes they would criticize in another context. For some viewers, this tension is part of what makes the movie interesting to revisit. Comedy frequently reveals the social assumptions of the period in which it was created. Jokes that once seemed ordinary may become surprising years later, while other jokes can gain new meanings that the filmmakers may never have intentionally planned. The treatment of body image is a strong example. Characters repeatedly discuss weight, dieting, attractiveness, and food. During the early 2000s, celebrity media frequently scrutinized women's bodies with extraordinary intensity. Very thin beauty standards were commonly promoted, while small changes in a celebrity's appearance could become tabloid stories. Modern viewers may interpret the film's exaggerated conversations about food as both comedy and evidence of the culture surrounding its production. Some laugh because the behavior is ridiculous. Others recognize uncomfortable similarities with real pressures experienced during that era. Female friendship provides another reason the movie has resonated. Although Kevin and Marcus are secretly men performing false identities, their relationships with Karen, Lisa, and Tori gradually become more emotionally genuine. The friends discuss insecurity, relationships, rejection, and confidence. Audiences often respond to these scenes because the emotional problems underneath the exaggerated comedy are recognizable. Karen's insecurity about romance, for example, exists in a world of wealthy socialites, but reflects an ordinary fear of not being considered desirable enough. White Chicks is primarily a broad comedy, so its characters do not undergo the kind of dramatic transformations normally associated with serious character studies. However, beneath the disguises, physical jokes, romantic misunderstandings, and criminal investigation, several characters experience meaningful changes. Kevin and Marcus Copeland begin as reckless FBI agents primarily concerned with saving their careers. By the end, their undercover experience has forced them to confront responsibility, friendship, relationships, insecurity, and the consequences of pretending to be someone else. Kevin Copeland begins the film as ambitious, impulsive, and extremely concerned with professional success. After the opening undercover operation goes wrong, Kevin understands that another failure could seriously damage his FBI career. This fear becomes the motivation behind the central deception. When Brittany and Tiffany Wilson refuse to continue to the Hamptons, Kevin is unwilling to accept defeat. Instead, he develops the outrageous plan for himself and Marcus to impersonate the sisters. This decision reveals both Kevin's greatest strength and greatest weakness. He is resourceful and determined, but he frequently believes that improvisation can solve problems without considering the consequences. Rather than admitting that the assignment has become impossible, he creates a larger deception. Every complication then requires another improvisation. Kevin initially treats the Hamptons' assignment almost entirely as a professional problem. The Wilson sisters and their friends belong to a social world he does not understand and frequently mocks. As he spends more time disguised as Brittany, however, he becomes involved in the personal lives of Karen, Lisa, and Tori. Their problems may initially appear superficial, but Kevin gradually recognizes that their insecurities are genuine. His relationship with Denise Porter exposes another side of his personality. Kevin is attracted to Denise, but does not trust that approaching her honestly will be enough. He therefore constructs another identity designed to impress her. This is important because Kevin becomes guilty of the same obsession with appearances that he observes among the wealthy socialites. Kevin's romantic deception mirrors his FBI disguise. In both cases, he assumes that controlling another person's perception is easier than presenting himself honestly. The difference is that his feelings for Denise are genuine. As the lies accumulate, he discovers that authentic emotion cannot easily survive inside an invented identity. By the conclusion, Kevin has become more aware of the damage caused by his constant improvisation. He still succeeds through unconventional methods, but success now includes taking responsibility for the people around him rather than simply protecting his career. His journey is therefore from reckless ambition toward a slightly more mature understanding of honesty and responsibility. Marcus Copeland experiences a different arc. Marcus is more reluctant than Kevin to participate in the impersonation and repeatedly recognizes how absurd their situation has become. He is dragged into many of Kevin's decisions, making him the character most visibly trapped by the disguise. Marcus also has personal problems before the central mission. His relationship with his wife, Gina, is strained by jealousy and misunderstanding. His secretive behavior as an FBI agent makes communication difficult, and the undercover assignment creates even greater complications. The irony is that Marcus spends much of the film advising other people about relationships while struggling with his own. His transformation into Tiffany forces him into situations where he experiences social expectations from a completely different perspective. Marcus becomes a target of unwanted romantic attention from Latrell Spencer, encounters conversations about appearance and body image, and participates in friendships where emotional openness is expected. The Latrell storyline is played almost entirely for comedy, but it creates a strange reversal for Marcus. He is accustomed to navigating the world as a male FBI agent. As Tiffany, he suddenly becomes the object of intense pursuit. His discomfort grows because he cannot simply respond as Marcus without risking exposure. His attempts to repel Latrell reveal how little control he actually has over another person's attraction. Marcus believes certain behaviors will make him undesirable, yet Latrell interprets almost everything positively. The situation repeatedly defeats Marcus's assumptions. Marcus also develops a more sympathetic understanding of the women surrounding him. Karen, Lisa, and Tori initially appear to belong to an absurd social environment, but their friendship becomes increasingly genuine. Marcus and Kevin discover that wealth does not eliminate insecurity, romantic disappointment, or the need for emotional support. By the end, Marcus has survived an experience that repeatedly challenged his confidence and forced him to operate outside his normal identity. His relationship with Gina also moves toward reconciliation, emphasizing the importance of communication rather than deception. Marcus does not become a completely different person, but he emerges with a broader understanding of relationships and vulnerability. Karen Googlestein has one of the clearest supporting character arcs. She begins as part of the glamorous social group surrounding the Wilson sisters, but lacks the confidence projected by several of her friends. Her romantic insecurity becomes increasingly visible, particularly in relation to men who fail to appreciate her. Kevin and Marcus, while pretending to be her friends, encourage Karen to recognize her own value. The situation is ironic because the advice comes from two people who are themselves hiding behind artificial appearances. Nevertheless, the emotional support is sincere. Karen's development reinforces one of the movie's recurring ideas. External appearance does not guarantee internal confidence. She belongs to a wealthy and fashionable social environment, but still worries about whether she is attractive or desirable enough. Her arc involves gaining greater self-respect rather than physically transforming herself. Latrell Spencer experiences less traditional development because much of his personality remains consistent throughout the film. His function is partly to surprise the audience by contradicting expectations. Costume, makeup, and production design are fundamental to White Chicks because the entire comedy depends on appearance. The story could not function without convincing the characters that Kevin and Marcus Copeland have become Brittany and Tiffany Wilson, while the larger world surrounding them must communicate wealth, privilege, fashion, and early 2000s celebrity culture. Clothing and locations are therefore not simply decorative elements. They establish identity, create jokes, communicate social status, and reinforce the film's central idea that appearances can determine how people are treated. The most important design achievement is naturally the transformation of Shawn Wayans and Marlon Wayans. Kevin and Marcus cannot merely put on dresses and wigs. Their undercover identities require complete visual reconstruction. Prosthetic makeup alters their facial appearance, while wigs, contact lenses, false teeth, cosmetics, costumes, accessories, and adjustments to their body silhouettes complete the transformation. The disguises are deliberately exaggerated. From the audience's perspective, Brittany and Tiffany have an artificial quality that becomes part of the comedy. The film does not require viewers to believe that the transformations would survive close inspection in reality. Instead, it created a heightened comic world where everyone around Kevin and Marcus accepts what they see. This visual artificiality actually benefits the movie. If the disguises were completely naturalistic, White Chicks would lose one of its most recognizable features. The slightly strange faces remind viewers constantly that Shawn and Marlon remain underneath the characters. Every expression, therefore, contains two identities simultaneously. The makeup must also remain flexible enough for performance. Shawn and Marlon rely heavily on exaggerated facial reactions, particularly when unexpected situations threaten their cover. Marcus's panic around Latrell Spencer would lose much of its humor if the prosthetics prevented Marlon from communicating fear through his eyes and mouth. Hair is equally important. The long blonde styles immediately identify the fictional Wilson sisters with a particular image of wealthy American femininity. Blonde hair has frequently been associated in popular culture with glamorous socialites, and White Chicks deliberately exaggerates that stereotype. The hairstyles also create strong visual continuity. Kevin and Marcus change clothes repeatedly, but their hair and facial transformations allow the audience to identify their undercover personas immediately. The silhouettes became so distinctive that promotional images of the disguised brothers remain recognizable decades later. Costume design then expands those identities. Brittany and Tiffany exist in a world where clothing communicates status. Their outfits need to suggest that they have money, follow trends, and expect to be noticed. The wardrobe, therefore, includes fashionable dresses, coordinated casual clothing, handbags, jewelry, high heels, and other accessories associated with the privileged social environment being parroted. The clothing reflects the early 2000s rather than timeless luxury. This has become increasingly noticeable as the movie has aged. Cuts, accessories, fabrics, hairstyles, and combinations that originally appear contemporary now help identify the film immediately with its period. For viewers who remember the era, these designs create nostalgia. For younger audiences, They provide a stylized representation of fashion culture before social media became the dominant force in celebrity presentation. White Chicks has unintentionally become a visual time capsule. The costumes also generate physical comedy. Kevin and Marcus are accustomed to moving as male FBI agents, and their new wardrobes force them to change how they walk, sit, dance, and react. High heels become more than accessories because they affect movement. Tight clothing changes posture. Handbags and jewelry become objects the brothers must remember to manage naturally. This means the wardrobe actively participates in the performances. A costume that merely looked fashionable but did not affect Shawn and Marlon physically would contribute much less to the comedy. Their discomfort is part of the illusion. The real Brittany and Tiffany established a template the agents must copy. Their original costumes communicate privilege before the central transformation occurs. Kevin and Marcus are not inventing random female identities. They are reproducing two women whose appearance is already connected to social expectations. The supporting women receive equally important wardrobe treatment. Karen, Lisa, Tori, Heather, and Megan belong to the same general wealthy environment, but their costumes help distinguish individual personalities. The Vandergeld sisters frequently appear more aggressively fashionable because their relationship with the Wilson sisters is based on competition. Their clothing becomes part of a social battle. In this world, an outfit can communicate dominance before anyone speaks. Characters evaluate each other according to presentation, meaning wardrobe functions almost like dialogue. Karen's appearance has a slightly different narrative purpose. Although she is fashionable and belongs to the same privileged group, her emotional insecurity contrasts with her polished exterior. Her costumes demonstrate that looking socially successful does not guarantee confidence. Latrell Spencer provides one of the strongest costume contrasts. His wardrobe emphasizes wealth, athletic masculinity, and confidence. Combined with Terry Crew's physical size, the clothing helps establish him as someone who dominates a room immediately. This makes his scenes with Marcus visually effective before the dialogue even begins. The disguised Marcus appears physically vulnerable beside Latrell, creating a visual joke through proportion. Costume reinforces that difference by presenting Latrell as confidently masculine, while Marcus is trapped inside an extremely constructed feminine identity. The FBI wardrobe exists at the opposite end of the design spectrum. Kevin and Marcus begin in practical professional clothing associated with their jobs. These costumes are relatively ordinary compared with the fashion world they later enter. The contrast makes their transformation more dramatic. When the brothers first appear fully disguised, the audience is not merely seeing different faces. Everything about their visual presentation has changed. The screenplay of White Chicks is built around escalation, misunderstanding, repetition, verbal confrontation, and the constant danger that Kevin and Marcus Copeland will expose their true identities. Rather than relying on a complicated mystery, the writing uses a relatively simple FBI investigation as a framework for a series of increasingly outrageous comic situations. Dialogue is central to this structure because the brothers must constantly talk their way out of problems created by their disguises. A conversation can become just as dangerous as a physical confrontation when one wrong answer could reveal that Brittany and Tiffany Wilson are not who everyone believes them to be. The screenplay was developed by Keenan Ivory Wayans, Shawn Wayans, Marlon Wayans, Andy McElfresh, Michael Anthony Snowden, and Xavier Cook. The involvement of all three Wayans brothers is significant because White Chicks belongs closely to the comedic tradition they had developed through earlier television and film projects. Their humor frequently combines parody, physical comedy, exaggerated stereotypes, rapid reactions, insults, and situations that continue becoming more ridiculous after a conventional screenplay might have ended the joke. The opening FBI operation establishes this writing style immediately. Kevin and Marcus are introduced through action and failure rather than lengthy exposition. The audience quickly learns that they are brothers, FBI agents, comfortable using disguises, and capable of making impulsive decisions. Their personalities are communicated through behavior and arguments rather than extended explanations. This is efficient because the screenplay needs to reach the central premise quickly. White Chicks cannot spend too much time functioning as an ordinary police comedy. The audience has come to see Kevin and Marcus transform themselves into the Wilson sisters. So the opening section establishes the professional stakes and then moves toward the incident that makes the impersonation possible. Once Brittany and Tiffany refuse to continue the Hamptons after their accident, the script introduces its defining decision. Kevin proposes that he and Marcus replace them. From that point forward, nearly every conversation contains two layers. There's what the disguised characters say publicly and what Kevin and Marcus actually think underneath. This dramatic irony gives the writers a constant source of humor. The audience knows the truth, while most characters do not. When Latrell Spencer flirts with Tiffany, viewers understand Marcus's horror, even when Latrell interprets his reactions completely differently. When the women discuss subjects Kevin and Marcus do not understand, the audience waits to see whether the brothers can improvise convincing answers. The dialogue frequently uses this gap between intention and interpretation. Marcus may say something designed to discourage Latrell, only for Latrell to hear exactly what he wants to hear. The screenplay then repeats the pattern with increasing intensity. Repetition is particularly important in White Chicks. Many of its strongest scenes do not depend on one perfect punchline. They establish a comic rule and repeat it with variations. Marcus behaves badly. Latrell becomes more attracted. Marcus behaves even worse. Latrell responds even more positively. The restaurant date is perhaps the clearest example. The writers understand that the basic joke becomes funnier through accumulation. Marcus believes there must eventually be a point where Latrell rejects him. Each failed attempt increases his desperation, while strengthening Latrell's confidence. This technique appears in verbal confrontations as well. The famous insult exchanges work because characters refuse to stop after the first attack. Each response demands another response. The dialogue becomes competitive, and the audience begins anticipating how far the characters will push the confrontation. The Yo Momma confrontation is memorable for precisely this reason. The subject itself is simple, but delivery and escalation transform into a comic performance. The characters behave as though the verbal battle has enormous importance. Their seriousness makes the absurdity stronger. White Chicks frequently gives dialogue a rhythmic quality. Setup, reaction, counterattack, and reaction form a repeating pattern. This makes many scenes easy to remember and quote because lines are connected to clear emotional beats. The screenplay also understands the importance of reaction dialogue. Kevin and Marcus do not always need elaborate jokes. Sometimes a short expression of disbelief is funnier because the audience has just witnessed something absurd. Shawn and Marlon performances allow simple lines to gain meaning through tone, facial expression, and timing. The altered voices used while impersonating Brittany and Tiffany add another layer. Written dialogue becomes funnier because audiences know who is actually speaking. A sentence that might sound ordinary coming from the real Wilson sisters becomes ridiculous when delivered by Kevin or Marcus while they desperately maintain their personas. The script repeatedly threatens to break those personas. When surprised, angry, or frightened, the brothers sometimes begin responding more naturally. Their voices, vocabulary, or physical attitudes shift. These moments create tension because another character might notice the inconsistency. Code switching therefore becomes part of the comedy. Kevin and Marcus move between their ordinary speech and the exaggerated speech patterns they associate with the Wilson sisters. The screenplay uses these transitions to remind viewers that the identities are performances requiring constant concentration. The supporting characters are written with highly distinctive voices. Latrell speaks with extraordinary confidence. Karen's dialogue frequently reveals insecurity beneath her social position. Heather and Megan communicate through competitive aggression. Agent Harper speaks with the frustration of a supervisor who expects Kevin and Marcus to create another disaster. These differences help the large ensemble remain understandable. White Chicks does not provide every supporting character with deep psychological complexity, but it gives them recognizable attitudes that can be communicated quickly through dialogue. The marketing of White Chicks faced a challenge that was also its greatest advantage. The movie had an outrageous concept that could be communicated almost instantly. Columbia Pictures did not need a complicated campaign explaining the story. The sight of Shawn Wayans and Marlon Wayans transformed into blonde white socialites immediately told audiences that this was a broad comedy built around disguise, mistaken identity, and the willingness of the Wayans family to push a ridiculous premise as far as possible. The unusual appearance of the central characters consequently became the foundation of the film's promotional identity. White Chicks arrived in the United States during the summer of 2004, a competitive period when Hollywood studios traditionally released major action films, family entertainment sequels, and comedies. The campaign needed to distinguish the movie from expensive spectacle without revealing every major joke. Its solution was to sell personality rather than scale. The disguises themselves functioned almost like a special effect, providing an immediately recognizable image for posters, trailers, television advertisements, and home video packaging. The theatrical poster made the central transformation impossible to miss. Shawn and Marlon appeared prominently in their Brittany and Tiffany disguises, with blonde hair, pale prosthetic faces, fashionable clothing, and exaggerated expressions. The image communicated the film's tone before audiences knew anything about the kidnapping investigation. These were clearly not intended to be realistic transformations. The artificiality was part of the attraction. This was important because marketing a comedy usually requires demonstrating the source of the humor quickly. A dramatic film can sell mystery, atmosphere, or a famous actor. A broad comedy often needs audiences to understand the joke immediately. White Chicks had an unusually simple visual proposition. Two black male FBI agents are going undercover as wealthy white women. The title strengthened that simplicity. White Chicks is short, provocative, memorable, and directly connected to the central disguise. It was a title that could be displayed prominently on advertising material without requiring explanation. It also signaled that the movie was willing to approach racial and gender identity through deliberately confrontational humor. The Wayans name was another major promotional asset. By 2004, Keenen Ivory Wayans, Shawn Wayans, and Marlon Wayans were already associated with successful comedy. In Living Color had established the family's importance in television, while Scary Movie had demonstrated that the Wayans style could attract large theatrical audiences. Marketing could therefore appeal to viewers who already understood what a Wayans comedy promised. Physical humor, parody, outrageous situations, cultural stereotypes, sexual jokes, and a willingness to cross conventional boundaries. White Chicks was not sold as a sophisticated social satire. It was sold as another opportunity to watch the family commit completely to an extreme comic concept. Trailers concentrated heavily on the transformation and the social situations created by it. The FBI investigation provided enough narrative information to explain why Kevin and Marcus were wearing the disguises, but the promotional material emphasized the consequences rather than the mechanics of the kidnapping case. Audiences were shown the brothers attempting to behave like Brittany and Tiffany, interacting with wealthy friends, encountering rivals, attracting romantic attention, and struggling to maintain their cover. This communicated the film's episodic structure effectively. The central question was not simply whether the FBI would solve the crime. It was how many ridiculous situations Kevin and Marcus would survive before somebody discovered the truth. Terry Crews Latrell Spencer provided especially useful trailer material. His attraction to the disguised Marcus could be understood immediately without extensive context. Marcus's discomfort and Latrell's confidence created a clear visual joke that could be presented in seconds. The trailers also benefited from the movie's strong reaction shots. Shawn and Marlon frequently communicate panic, disbelief, anger, or embarrassment through exaggerated facial expressions. These reactions work effectively in short advertisements because viewers do not need detailed narrative information to understand them. Music contributed to the youthful tone of the promotion. White Chicks was aimed heavily at audiences familiar with contemporary pop, hip-hop, R&B, fashion, celebrity culture, and mainstream youth entertainment. The campaign positioned the movie as part of that cultural environment rather than as a traditional police comedy. The release period was also significant. A summer opening allowed White Chicks to function as accessible entertainment for younger moviegoers and groups looking for a comedy rather than a serious dramatic experience. Word of mouth became particularly important because the critical response was poor. Professional reviews could easily have damaged the movie. Many critics attacked the makeup, screenplay, stereotypes, and broad humor. Yet the promotional concept had already established a direct relationship with the intended audience. People who found the trailers funny were unlikely to be surprised by the style of the finished film. This separation between critical opinion and audience expectations helped White Chicks commercially. The campaign did not promise subtle filmmaking and then deliver something crude. It openly advertised the movie's absurdity. Viewers generally knew the type of comedy they were buying a ticket to see. Television advertising was particularly suited to the film. Short comic scenes could be edited into compact commercials, ending with the recognizable images of Brittany and Tiffany. Repetition strengthened awareness because the disguises were difficult to confuse with another movie. Entertainment television and cast interviews provided additional exposure. Shawn and Marlon Wayans were valuable promotional personalities because their real-life relationship as brothers mirrored the partnership audiences saw on screen. White Chicks occupies an unusual position within the tradition of disguise comedies. Its basic idea was not new when the film appeared in 2004. Cinema had spent decades building stories around characters changing their appearance, gender presentation, social identity, or profession in order to enter environments normally unavailable to them. What made White Chicks distinctive was the number of boundaries it crossed simultaneously. Kevin and Marcus Copeland are black male FBI agents pretending to be wealthy young white women, turning race, gender, class, profession, and social status into parts of the same elaborate deception. One of the most obvious comparisons is Some Like It Hot, the classic 1959 comedy starring Tony Curtis, Jack Lemmon, and Marilyn Monroe. In that film, two male musicians disguise themselves as women after witnessing a crime and join an all-female band. The circumstances are very different, but both movies use a similar comic engine. Male protagonists must maintain female identities, while romantic complications and the possibility of discovery constantly threaten the deception. Some Like It Hot approaches a concept with sophisticated dialogue, carefully constructed romantic misunderstandings, and the elegance associated with director Billy Wilder. White Chicks uses a much louder style. Physical comedy, racial jokes, body humor, insults, popular music, and exaggerated reactions replace much of the verbal sophistication. Yet the fundamental narrative principle is remarkably similar. The disguise creates access to a new social world, but every new relationship makes maintaining that disguise more difficult. Tootsie provides another important comparison. Released in 1982, it stars Dustin Hoffman as an actor who adopts a female identity to obtain employment. Tootsie uses a disguise to explore professional inequality, relationships, and the protagonist's understanding of how women are treated. Its comedy is balanced with a stronger dramatic interest in what the central character learns from the experience. White Chicks occasionally approaches similar territory, but rarely remains serious for long. Kevin and Marcus gain insight into female friendship, body insecurity, unwanted romantic attention, and social expectations surrounding beauty. However, these observations are generally transformed immediately into jokes. White Chicks is less interested in realistically examining gender than in using the collision between identities to create comic situations. Mrs. Doubtfire offers another variation. Robin Williams plays a divorced father who disguises himself as an elderly female housekeeper to remain close to his children. The transformation is elaborate and requires extensive prosthetic makeup, creating an obvious technical connection with White Chicks. The major difference is emotional motivation. Mrs. Doubtfire builds its disguise around family separation and parental love. The audience is encouraged to care deeply about whether Daniel can maintain a relationship with his children. White Chicks begins with professional desperation. Kevin and Marcus adopt their identities because they fear another FBI failure. As a result, White Chicks has fewer sentimental obligations. The filmmakers can make the disguise intentionally grotesque and place the characters in increasingly absurd situations because the emotional foundation is lighter. Mrs. Doubtfire wants audiences to believe in the person underneath the transformation. White Chicks wants audiences to laugh whenever that person threatens to emerge. The film can also be compared with Big Momma's House, released in 2000 and starring Martin Lawrence. That movie is especially relevant because its protagonist is also a black law enforcement officer who uses an elaborate female disguise during an investigation. Both films combine undercover police storytelling with prosthetic transformation and physical comedy. Big Momma's House therefore provides one of the closest structural relatives to White Chicks. However, the disguises create very different characters. Malcolm Turner becomes an older black woman, while Kevin and Marcus become young, wealthy white women. White Chicks consequently expands the identity contrast by adding race and class to the gender transformation. Big Momma's House also focuses more consistently on its crime investigation and developing romantic storyline. White Chicks increasingly allows a criminal case to move into the background while social comedy takes over. The Hamptons environment becomes almost a separate universe where shopping, friendships, dating, fashion, and rivalry are more important than conventional police work. White Chicks can also be compared with A Hot Chick, released in 2002. That film uses supernatural body swapping rather than prosthetic disguise, with Rob Schneider's character becoming physically connected to the identity of a teenage girl. Both movies derive humor from male behavior appearing within a female social context. The difference again lies in mechanism. The Hot Chick uses fantasy, while White Chicks uses an intentionally impossible undercover transformation. Because Kevin and Marcus choose to maintain their identities, the tension comes from performance. They must constantly remember how Brittany and Tiffany are supposed to behave. Within the Wayans family's own filmography, Scary Movie is an essential comparison. Keenan Ivory Wayans directed Scary Movie, while Shawn and Marlon were important members of its cast. Both films share a willingness to use crude humor, stereotypes, physical exaggeration, and jokes that challenge conventional ideas of good taste. However, Scary Movie is fundamentally a parody. Its structure depends on audiences recognizing horror films, such as Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer. White Chicks is not a direct parody of one specific movie. Instead, it parodies an entire social environment. The Wilson sisters resemble exaggerated versions of wealthy celebrity heiresses from early 2000s popular culture. Their friends, rivals, fashion obsessions, dieting conversations, parties, and social competition create a satire of tabloid celebrity culture rather than a direct spoof of one cinematic source. This gives White Chicks a stronger independent narrative identity than many parody films of its era. Audiences do not need knowledge of another movie to understand the jokes. Familiarity with early 2000s celebrity culture can add context, but the central situations remain understandable on their own.